Evelyn Merrow was the kind of woman whose smile could warm an entire room yet whose silence could freeze the deepest soul, and when the camera pans across the dimly lit hallway of her abandoned apartment, the voiceover begins with a chilling hook, a question that claws at the mind. What really happened to the woman who trusted too easily and feared too late? Her story begins on a rainy Thursday night when she crossed paths with Adrian Cade, a charming photographer with a talent for hiding shadows. Behind beauty, the city lights flickered as though warning her to turn back, but fate pulled her forward into a world she never expected to enter. Adrian was obsessed, an infatuation so powerful that it twisted into something dark, something hungry. He followed her dreams, consumed her weaknesses, and studied her life like a script he planned to rewrite. The atmosphere tightens as investigators walk through that same apartment years later, their footsteps echoing through memories Evelyn had documented. Her fears scribbling desperate notes about a man who watched her from corners and followed her reflection, not her figure. She felt hunted but had no proof until the nights grew colder and the calls grew stranger, each whisper carrying a message drenched in threat. Her friends urged her to run, but she refused, believing no one should be forced from their own life. Little did she know that the danger waiting for her was not outside the door but already inside her world, breathing in the same air and smiling through false kindness. She thought she knew Adrian, but the truth was a monstrous shape she never dared imagine, waiting patiently for the moment her light dimmed enough for him to take everything she had left in silence. The investigation into Evelyn Merrow's disappearance tightened like a noose around the truth as detectives uncovered the subtle signs of a life slowly collapsing under the weight of unseen terror, and every detail pointed toward the same unsettling presence that hovered around her like a storm waiting to break. Friends remembered the shift in her eyes, the way she glanced over her shoulder as though expecting a shape to emerge from the shadows, and though she tried to hide the trembling in her hands, her fear leaked through every hurried breath she took. Adrian Cade had begun appearing everywhere, drifting into her routine with a familiarity that felt unnatural, and yet he always wore the same gentle smile that convinced everyone he was harmless, even though Evelyn sensed the darkness swelling beneath his calm surface. She wrote quiet notes in the margins of her journal describing footsteps behind her on empty streets and the faint rustle at her window long after midnight, but she told no one because she feared sounding paranoid and because some part of her wished to believe she was imagining it. Detectives found those notes later, each one a fragile plea for help that went unheard, and as they interviewed co-workers they learned how Evelyn had stopped laughing at small jokes and had begun sitting close to the exit as if calculating escape routes. Her neighbors admitted hearing muffled voices at night, never shouting, just one soft voice talking to someone who never replied, and they now realized Evelyn had been whispering to herself, trying to calm the rising panic that grew stronger every evening. Piece by piece the investigators painted a picture of a woman who felt hunted long before she vanished, and though no evidence directly tied Adrian to her disappearance, every thread of her final days wound closer to his quiet, unsettling devotion that had already begun to poison her life. The deeper investigators dug into Adrian Cade's past, the more disturbing layers they uncovered, and each revelation twisted the story into something darker than anyone expected. Because Adrian was not simply infatuated with Evelyn Merrow, he was constructing his own reality around her, shaping her world piece by piece until it fit the obsession festering in his mind. Former classmates described him as quiet but intensely watchful, the kind of person who memorized every detail about someone yet revealed nothing about himself, and he moved through life collecting attachments like fragile artifacts he refused to let go. Detectives found evidence of his previous fixation on another woman years earlier, a woman who had abruptly moved cities, leaving behind a trail of complaints about being followed, photographed and studied by someone she could never quite identify, and though nothing was proven, the pattern mirrored Evelyn's fears with eerie precision. Adrian had visited her workplace pretending to be a supportive friend, offering to walk her home, bringing her small gifts and speaking in a soft voice that made his intentions difficult to question, but surveillance footage showed the truth. He lingered in hallways, watched her leave through windows, and appeared in streets she never mentioned to him. Every coincidence was intentional, every encounter engineered to feel natural, while slowly tightening the psychological cage around her. On Evelyn's final week she began telling herself she was safe, that maybe Adrian was just misunderstood or lonely, even though her gut screamed otherwise, and detectives believed this inner conflict weakened her guard just enough for Adrian to step closer than ever before. When they found Adrian's storage unit, what they discovered sent a chill through every investigator. Inside it were sketches, photographs and notes tracking Evelyn's movements like a ritualistic map of her life, and at the center of the wall a blank space shaped like her silhouette, as though he had been waiting for the final piece that would complete his twisted creation. The night investigators reconstructed Evelyn Merrow's final hours. The atmosphere in the briefing room turned heavy like a storm suspended in time, because every clue led them closer to a truth none of them wanted to face, and the timeline that unfolded was more chilling than any of them had imagined. Evelyn had finished a late shift walking home under thinning streetlights, unaware that Adrian Cade was only a few steps behind her. Moving with the calm patience of someone who believed destiny was guiding him, her neighbors later recalled hearing a soft knock followed by her hesitant footsteps crossing the floor, and detectives believed she opened the door thinking it was a friend, but instead came face to face with the obsession she had tried to outrun. Inside the apartment, the evidence suggested a struggle, not violent but desperate, as though Evelyn was pleading rather than fighting, and investigators imagined the room filled with her trembling breath and Adrian's quiet voice insisting that he simply wanted her to understand him. He followed her into the living room, cornering her with words instead of force, convincing himself that she would eventually accept him if she could only listen long enough. The scene pointed to a psychological collapse, a moment where fear met delusion and neither side could pull away. Then everything went silent. Only the overturned lamp and the torn page from her journal hinted at the final seconds. Detectives believed Adrian never intended to end her life, but obsession has no boundaries, and in the suffocating pressure of that moment something snapped, leaving him with a truth too horrifying to face and a secret he tried to bury in darkness. He carried her into the night believing he could rewrite what had happened, but every step exposed the reality he refused to accept, and the shadows around him grew heavier with each breath, until escape became a fading illusion. When detectives traced Adrian's movements after Evelyn vanished, they uncovered a sequence of actions that revealed a mind unraveling under the weight of obsession and denial. He had driven toward the outskirts of the city, following an abandoned service road that cut through miles of silent forest, a place where even the wind felt afraid to speak. Witnesses later reported seeing a single car parked near the tree line, its headlights dimmed as though hiding from the night itself, and investigators believed Adrian sat inside for hours, gripping the steering wheel, trembling as the reality of what he had done began to seep through the cracks of his delusion. He wandered into the woods, carrying her with a gentleness that felt disturbingly intimate, whispering to her lifeless form as if she were simply sleeping, and could still hear him, his words drifting through the trees like a broken lullaby. Before fading into the darkness, he buried her beneath a shallow layer of earth, arranging her hair as though preparing her for a photograph, and the thought of Adrian smoothing the dirt with his bare hands sent chills through every officer reconstructing that moment. Afterward, when he returned home, he attempted to craft an illusion of normalcy, washing his clothes, scrubbing the floor, cleaning every trace of struggle, but detectives later noted that obsession leaves stains no bleach can hide, and grief festers in silence no matter how deeply it is buried. Over the following days, Adrian isolated himself, pacing through his apartment, staring at the empty space where he once pinned Evelyn's silhouette on his wall, his mind spiraling as he convinced himself she was not gone, only hidden, waiting for him somewhere beyond the mistakes he refused to acknowledge. And each passing hour tightened the noose of guilt around him until he could no longer distinguish memory from reality and fear from devotion. As the investigation intensified, detectives began piecing together the final cracks in Adrian's crumbling psyche, and the closer they drew to the truth, the more disturbing his behavior became. Neighbors recalled seeing him wander the hallway late at night, muttering to himself as though speaking to someone who was no longer there, and investigators believed these whispers were the first signs that guilt had begun twisting into something far more dangerous. He stopped going to work, ignored calls from friends, and kept his curtains tightly shut, letting the apartment sink into a darkness that matched the turmoil inside him. Officers obtained a warrant and searched his home, finding the walls stripped bare except for one haunting detail, a mirror positioned directly across from his bed, where he had been staring at his own reflection for hours, perhaps trying to convince himself he still had control of the life he had shattered. They uncovered shredded photographs of Evelyn scattered across the trash bin, as though he had torn apart the only memories he had left in a desperate attempt to silence the echo of her presence in his kitchen. Detectives found a notebook filled with erratic handwriting, phrases repeated over and over about fate, destiny, and love, as if Adrian was trying to rewrite the narrative in his head, refusing to accept the truth that obsession, not love, had driven him to destroy the one person he claimed to cherish. Meanwhile, a tip from a local hiker led officers to the forest outskirts where disturbed soil and personal belongings confirmed what many feared, and as forensic teams closed and Adrian grew increasingly unhinged, pacing his apartment walls and speaking to the empty corners as though Evelyn was still there, listening to him, breathing with him, haunting him piece by piece until the madness he had created became the only companion he had left in the silent darkness that swallowed his last threads of sanity. As officers closed in on Adrian Cade, preparing to make the arrest that would finally end the hunt, the investigation took a turn no one expected, and the twist that emerged shattered every assumption they had built. The night before the raid, detectives received a call from a forensic analyst who had been reviewing the soil samples from the forest, and what they discovered rewrote the entire narrative because the remains found there did not belong to Evelyn Merrow. The revelation hit the task force like a violent shockwave, leaving every investigator frozen in disbelief, and the voiceover deepens as the truth unfolds. The body buried in the woods was from years earlier, belonging to another victim whose disappearance had gone unnoticed, and suddenly Adrian's pattern grew far darker than anyone imagined. When officers entered his apartment, they found the door ajar, the room silent except for the creaking hum of a fan, and on the wall in the space where Evelyn's silhouette once hung there was now a message scrawled in uneven handwriting: "She is not gone." She finally understands. This discovery twisted the investigation into pure nightmare territory because security cameras revealed Adrian leaving the building only minutes earlier, carrying a canvas bag and walking with eerie calm as though he were following a plan he had waited years to complete. Investigators scrambled to track him, and when they reached the rooftop of a neighboring building they found what he left behind: Evelyn's necklace, placed neatly at the edge like a signature of possession, but no sign of Adrian except a discarded photograph showing Evelyn alive sometime after the night she vanished, hinting that she had been held somewhere hidden far from the places police had searched. The case cracked open into chilling uncertainty, leaving detectives questioning every conclusion and wondering if Evelyn was still out there, trapped inside the twisted fantasy of a man who refused to let reality touch his delusion forever. The search for Evelyn Merrow exploded into a nationwide operation as investigators realized they were no longer dealing with a single crime but a labyrinth built by a mind that fed on control and misdirection, and every step forward only revealed another layer of deception waiting to drag them deeper into the darkness. Agents retraced Adrian's movements across months, uncovering abandoned cabins, storage units, and derelict buildings where he had left fragments of his obsession behind, each location holding items that hinted Evelyn had been alive far longer than anyone believed. Photographs of her with blurred backgrounds, recordings of faint breathing, and scribbled notes that read "almost ready, almost perfect." These traces painted a horrifying picture of captivity, one that stretched far beyond the timeline investigators once accepted. The turning point came when a warehouse owner reported hearing soft tapping from a sealed storage room, a sound he assumed was pipes until the news broadcast revealed Adrian's escape. Officers rushed to the scene, breaking through the metal door with weapons drawn, only to find a small room lit by a single flickering bulb, and in the center a chair with restraints cut open as though someone had been freed before their arrival. Beside it sat a stack of Evelyn's journals, pages filled with her handwriting describing days of waiting, nights of fear, and strange conversations with Adrian, who shifted between gentle caretaker and unpredictable captor. Her words trembling with hope and terror intertwined, but still no sign of her. As detectives examined the room, one detail froze them: a fresh footprint smaller than Adrian's leading toward the back exit, suggesting Evelyn had escaped on her own moments before they arrived, and the realization sent shock through the entire team. She was alive but terrified, running through a city unprepared for her return, a city where Adrian still moved like a phantom, and the final haunting question settled over everyone: could